Hey, it's Tim, Pickup Truck Plus, SUV Talk. First time on the channel, welcome. On this channel, I do truck and SUV news, reviews, interesting stuff. But today I'm really excited. I'm joined by my friend, John Volker. He's with a lot of experience. I'm going to read his bio here in a second, but I bring him in because you could actually criticize me as maybe not being an EV fanboy. I'm not holding on the flag behind me about how great EV cars and trucks are. But I do want to make sure I'm up on the latest stuff, make sure you guys are informed of what's going on, because there's a lot of fast changing stuff going on in the EV world, and it's going to impact trucks here before you know it. And frankly, I can't live underneath the rock anymore. Our V8's going away and things are changing. So before I get to John, I want to read his bio because it's really pretty impressive. He was the editor of Green Car Reports for 9 years, publishing more than 12,000 articles on hybrids, electric cars, and other low and zero emission vehicles and the energy ecosystem around them. His work has appeared in print, online, radio outlets like Wired, Popular Science, Tech Review, the IEEE Spectrum, and NPR's All Things Considered, and very excited to say in Car and Driver, which I know was a particularly good moment for him. So thanks, John, for being on the program.
Thank you for having me. It's an honor.
Yeah, so those guys don't know, John and I have gone around a little bit on Facebook, so we thought, what the heck, why don't we just record something? A, it makes it easier and our fingers not typing out these long paragraphs of responses, but B, we share it with you, the audience. So what's going on right now, we're seeing a lot of news items. I don't know about John's inbox. My inbox gets filled every single day with EV news and this brand new thing. And now we have the news saying California is going to ban ICE cars in 2030, and Germany's done with them, and UK is going full EV. And it's like, all of a sudden, it's like these trucks we have are just going to be banned. We don't want them anymore. They're nasty. They breathe too much carbon dioxide. And they're just awful things, and you don't need it anymore. Which for most truck guys, when you tell them you don't need something, that's immediately when they want it. And immediately when there's some responses back, like rolling coal, like cutting off emissions equipment and things. And so, John, where's the current status EV market? Are we there? Is EVs like out tomorrow? Like, it's just all this fear around this.
Like any automotive transition, this stuff takes time, and it's going to take generations. The model I use is catalytic converters. Think about the first catalyst came in 75, right? It took a 25-year period before every vehicle made on the planet had a catalytic converter, okay? So this is not something that's going to happen tomorrow. It's being driven by two things. First is regulation. The idea is you have to cut carbon dioxide out of the tailpipe. If we are going to stem the worst effects of climate change by 2050, we have to take about 80% of the carbon dioxide we emit across all sectors. And that's agriculture, it's transportation, it's manufacturing, all of it. We have to eliminate that by 2050. Interestingly, the electric utility industry is already way ahead of the curve because renewable power is now really cheap. It's competitive with some of the sort of billion-dollar new generating plants. So they're ahead of everybody else. But in terms of transportation, there's really no question anymore. Electric vehicles have lower carbon per mile when you look at the whole value chain, from extracting the oil, refining it, transporting it, and then burning it at 25 or 35% efficiency in a vehicle versus however you get your electric power, whether it's coal or renewables, and then putting it into an electric car and using it to turn the wheels. So what we call wells to wheels carbon, way lower for electric cars, even if they're charged on the filthiest grid in the country, which is full coal. They're better than the average gasoline car. Once you get into cleaner grids, and the whole grid is getting cleaner quicker, but once you get into the cleanest grids, which tend to be on the coast, you're the equivalent of a 100-mile-a-gallon gasoline vehicle. There's no such thing. You're never going to have one. That's how clean electric cars can get. So that's the driver behind the regulations. Now, you mentioned early on a ban. Ban, as you said, is a challenging word. People don't like bans. They like options, right? What is proposed to happen in California, as well as a number of European countries, and most importantly, China, is that they are going to say, at this point, we want no new passenger vehicles to be sold with tailpipes, okay? Or we want all passenger vehicles to be sold with the ability to run zero emission at some point, which is where your plug-in hybrids come in, okay? They are not going to come to your lawn, break open your garage, seize your truck, and crush it on your lawn. I promise, okay? This is because, you know, the headlines are the headlines, and people don't necessarily read or hear the news for whatnot. But for all of your viewers, I promise you, I have 6 gasoline burning cars in my garage right now. They're all going to stay there. They'll be fine. So that's really what's driving it. But what we're starting to see now, and the sort of history is, when the first electric car was introduced and sold, almost exactly 10 years ago today, actually. The first Leaf was sold on December 11th. The first Volt was sold 10 years ago today. When they came out, they weren't really acceptable practical cars. The Leaf had a 73-mile range, and both of them were compact hatchbacks, and probably most of your audience doesn't do a lot with compact hatchbacks, or at least not for the bulk of what they do, right? Battery costs have fallen so much more than anyone predicted in those 10 years that all of the assumptions about, well, we'll have affordable, practical electric vehicles in all the segments that sell big in America, oh, maybe 2030, 2040, those are now going to be here by 2025. And so we are about to see a whole raft of compact crossovers that are battery electric, ranges of maybe 250 miles or more. Tesla's been making one for a couple of years, but it's a little bit higher than the average price. But we're going to have a whole bunch of those coming. And then after that, pickup trucks and 3-row SUVs as well. And so all of a sudden, in the segments that are most popular in America, which are compact crossovers and full-size pickups, you will have electric entries, which brings a lot more people at least to see them, to know they exist, and to start thinking about, does this match what I do with my truck?
Yeah,
I can talk for hours, as you know, so interrupt me with the questions.
Right. But I mean, no, that's good. There's always been this conversation about more people into trucks because historically you've paid a mile per gallon penalty for driving a truck. I mean, if you were using it for commuting, you basically had to give up some mile per gallon to get that fuel economy of like a sedan. Right. What we've seen in the truck world is we've seen that mile per gallon has grown exponentially. I mean, my 62 outside, I think gets 6 miles a gallon downhill with stiff breeze. So, and the diesel outside of this guy gets like, you can get 30 miles per gallon to 2-wheel drive. I mean, that's phenomenal that we've come this far, this fast in a fuel economy thing. Now, there's always going to be the segment of the truck public that says, well, I didn't buy a truck mile per gallon, I bought it for utility, so I don't care about miles per gallon. But as we all know, and we've discussed before, I think the easiest way to hit that 8% goal is to get more electrified trucks. I mean, the reality of things is some sort of electrification is the future. And to get to that point, we have to have a truck to do that because trucks are just more utilitarian for most of the country. I mean, the heartland out here, I mean, I think there's one guy with a Tesla and he kind of makes it work, and it's just kind of, it's a situation. But looking at a couple things you said there, there's been a long running discussion about the wheels to wheels emissions of an EV vehicle. Right. And there's a lot of discussion that maybe a prior discussion had been that it did create more pollution to build than the internal combustion engine. Now, as you know, I've done a lot of research before we started this interview. It seems like that's a myth. It seems like that's changed now, that the EV vehicle is now has less emissions throughout the whole supply chain. Is that kind of what you're saying?
Not necessarily in the supply chain, but wells to wheels emissions has essentially 3 components. There's what it takes to make the fuel or the energy. So that's what it takes to generate electricity, or what it takes to yank oil out of the ground and turn it into gasoline and get the gasoline to your pump. So that's number 1. Number 2 is manufacturing the vehicle itself. And number 3 is the amount of energy you actually have to use over the vehicle's lifetime to move it around, okay? Electric generation, by and large, varies quite a lot, but the carbon burden is heaviest for coal, natural gas is better, and then renewables are obviously best by far. We've reduced our carbon footprint on generating electricity by moving from coal to natural gas and coal to natural gas plus renewables. And now what we're starting to see is coal is dead. The last coal plant may not shut down till 2030 or something, but it's massively uneconomic. Utilities don't want it. They want to get rid of it as soon as possible. And what we're starting to see is the best natural gas power plants now are being hit with cost competitive renewables. I didn't expect to end up knowing so much about energy, but it turns out to be something that you talk about and people get interested. I used to think of utility scale renewables, right? And it was like, I don't know if you saw the focused mirrors on motors on towers that focused in the sun's energy to boil water.
Yeah,
that was very 2012. Utility scale renewables now is 5,000 acres of really cheap racked solar panels. So you know what? Trees fall on one of them, fine, doesn't matter. The maintenance is very low, they're very reliable, and increasingly utilities pair them with batteries to store and use the energy when it's needed. And that stuff has zero maintenance and a long life. So that's what we're moving toward in utilities. That is where we will be, whether it's 10 or 20 or 30 years from now. That's piece one. Piece two is making the vehicle, which is what you asked about. The carbon burden of making a vehicle with, say, a 60 or 80 kilowatt hour battery is definitely higher than the carbon burden of making a comparable size vehicle with an engine and a transmission. However, the savings on the energy you use over its lifetime to move it around are so massive over its life that you start with a slight disadvantage, and the numbers vary depending on what assumptions you use, but somewhere between 15,000 and 45,000 miles, and it's getting lower all the time, the electric car overcomes that carbon burden, and then it's reduced carbon from then for the rest of its lifetime. And electric vehicles get cleaner every time the grid gets cleaner. So if you move from West Virginia, which is all coal, to a place that gets 90% hydropower like northern New York State, all of a sudden your electric car has gotten 4 or 5 times cleaner.
And let's talk. Another point you brought up there was, and we've talked about this a little bit, is I guess I should say it a little differently. One of my criticisms of the majority reporting on these days on EVs is we tend to lose a little bit of the practical side of it. Like, you know, what happens when the power goes out? How do you charge a car? What happens when you want to tow something in the truck? You know, nobody ever talks about towing range with a battery. I equate it to my EV truck that I have. This is my EV truck, and you put some rocks in him, and he doesn't go very far.
Yeah.
And it's the same idea. You put the weight in there. But I want to talk about something that brought up that we've discussed a lot in this comments and things, is that this idea of brownouts. There's rolling brownouts. I know you've talked to many energy executives about this, and you know, frankly, it's on them that provide power. That's
why they're a utility.
Right. Yeah. But there's this thought about having battery storage as well, and battery storage in the grid, so that when the power does go out, you still have excess energy.
Yep. Couple of issues. People tend to forget you can't buy fuel if there's a blackout either, because you got to pump it out of the ground with electric pumps. I don't know how many gas stations in more rural areas have backup generators. Most of the gas stations around me do not. You know, I'm 140 miles north of New York City. So, you know, there is this problem that if you have a 6-hour blackout, can't get fuel either. If you're down to 7 miles of range on your EV, that's a problem if you have to leave. And you do not necessarily have, at this point in time, the 5-gallon can of electrons. However, I'm about to build a house, and what we are going to start to see is, in addition to rooftop solar, the economics of which vary a lot depending on state incentives, how sunny it is, where you are, etc. But it even works for me in the snowy belt of New York State. I will end up having a storage battery. And what that means is I will be able to charge my car off my house storage battery enough to do emergency. It's what...
Well, yeah, but that's been a concern. Like the hurricanes hit Florida, and all these vehicles are on, was it 15 or 75, whatever, they're trying to get out of town. And, you know, there's real concerns about what do you do with an EV and hurricane? How do you get on the road? How do you keep going?
Well, in general, people plug in their EVs every night at home, okay? Yes, there's an issue with apartment buildings, but more than half of Americans have dedicated off-street parking, and 98% of that or something is within a dozen feet of electricity somewhere, or 100 feet. So most people plug in their vehicles overnight. So every morning you end up with a full tank, if you like, or a fully charged vehicle. If you have a 200-mile range electric car, remember, if you're caught in a traffic jam on Florida 1, you're not burning much energy in an electric car compared to idling in your gasoline car. So I'm not saying there aren't scenarios and use cases, but one of the things that people tend to focus on, understandably, is the worst possible case. I can produce a bunch of worst possible cases for gasoline vehicles as well. I'm fine with taking the low-hanging fruit right now. The average American household has 2.4 vehicles, okay? Even if one of those becomes electric for trips with only in, say, a 100-mile range, you're not going to need the capabilities of a truck every time. And sort of moving forward to where I think we were going, we are going to see electric pickup trucks coming. Do you guys get a lot of interest in Rivian or awareness, or not really?
What's interesting especially with this channel is I have a really hard time getting people to watch the videos. I have a really hard time getting the interest level up on that stuff. I would say out of all the trucks coming, you have the Tesla fanboys, and I'm sorry, that thing's a turd, and it's just not appealing at all. But you have some fanboys of Tesla brand, but I would say out of all of them, between Lordstown and the Ford F-150 EV, which will likely be a low-range commercial around town city truck, Rivian gets the most appeal, and it gets most my appeal. I mean, I've looked into buying one, honestly. And the reason for that is I think Rivian is one of those companies that actually is marketing it in the right way. They're saying it's a sport, they're a lifestyle activity vehicle. They're not calling it a truck because they really understand that for a diesel loving, gasoline loving, long haul towing kind of guy, he's just not going to think much of that. But I think if you're going to put it in a way that says, hey, this is a lifestyle activity vehicle and you can use it different ways, it makes a lot of sense. And I can see the smaller size of the Rivian making sense. I've long advocated that trucks have gotten too large and we should have a small Subaru Baja, Nissan hardbody type truck that's electric powertrain, like Ford's making the Maverick coming back. That's a perfect electric powertrain. I think in certain circumstances that makes sense, but it's hard to get it really. I mean, and that's one of the concerns I have is it's hard to get truck guys interested in EV trucks. We just tend to see all the limitations. We see the towing limitations. We see the payload limitations. We see the price limitations. Like, I know you just wrote your Mach-E first review, and we had one on our channel too. Sue Mead wrote it, but I mean, you look at the price difference of like a 4-passenger SUV versus a Mach-E. I mean, it's still a premium SUV, and so trucks have gotten larger. They've gotten more capable. They've also got more expensive, and
they've gotten massively more expensive. What's the average transaction price on an F series?
Yeah,
it's 50 grand.
It's 49,000 right now. Last year was 49,000. I put a deposit down on a 61,000 XLT, which is the second trim above the XL, which is the base level. A Lariat is 70 to 80,000, and so then you take that and you take that plus what I consider the electric premium, which my ballpark's 10, 15,000 more. It seems like the numbers I'm looking at, and so I mean you're looking at $100,000 pickup that, in my view, is great to EV. You want to cut emissions. I know every truck guy I know doesn't want to pollute the land. We like to hunt, we like to fish, we like to, we don't want to be that kind of generation. But you're also trading off some of the capability. Like, in my view, transportation's always been about making your life easier. I live in an area where the towns are 25 to 30 miles apart. And the reason for that was in the 1960s and the 50s and 60s, the train depot would drop off corn at each place and pick up corn. The farmers' wagons could only go so far, so they would just build these towns around the grain elevators and load them up in the railroad. As trucks became out in the 50s, 60s, and 70s, and we had longer range, you could drive them longer, those towns went through decline. And so when I look at things, I think, okay, well, now we're talking about taking away that fast fueling, taking away that range, taking away that, and making it so now it takes longer to charge and less to drive. It just gets me concerned. And I just, that's where I wonder, like, where is the future here? How are we going to get from the truck being a novelty item, electric truck being a novelty item, which is kind of where Rivian's heading, and definitely where Ford, I think, is heading with the EV. I mean, you look at what the Transit is, and I think the F-150 is going to be the same way. There's limitations on that stuff. It seems like I've been doing much research on solid state batteries and battery density. It seems like we're not quite there yet for the mass adoption of trucks.
I think that's probably true. You need to start somewhere, prove that it's capable first off. I don't know if you saw it, but I was amused that I actually got to use the word badass in a headline. Um, I wrote about the GMC Hummer EV. They're not going to sell a ton of those. Hummer across 3 model lines, the most they ever sold in 1 year was $72,000 or $74,000. 72 or 74,000 units, I forget. And that was with H1, H2, H3. So, they're not going to sell a ton of GMC Hummer EVs, but the purpose of that vehicle is to hit reset hard on what an electric vehicle is, what it can do, and to show that, in fact, with a very large battery pack, you can do really remarkable things off-road. You can provide better capabilities out of the showroom that you would have to add to an off-road vehicle. And yeah, it's going to be expensive. It's an image vehicle. Regular Hummers weren't particularly cheap. It's interesting to me that GM used that as the first vehicle that they put a big bunch of marketing behind. They have about a dozen EVs coming. I've seen the mock-ups of most of them, or pictures. They will have a Suburban-like vehicle and an Escalade-like vehicle that are electric. GM knows they have to have a range of 300 miles. GM's also, parenthetically, building its own joint venture billion-dollar battery plant in Ohio to provide cells for all of this. So they will have those economies of scale for next generation batteries. But they're going to have compact crossovers for all of their brands. They haven't talked as much about pickups, except there was a Chevrolet pickup that they sort of teased recently. So they have really big plans. GM is dead serious about electric vehicles. I will say I just came out of a weekend with the Ford Mustang Mach-E. I have to remember to call it a Mustang. I just think of it as the Mach-E. And I have a feeling there are a lot of Mustang bros who will be the same way. But in the same way that the Volt was not a Chevy. People didn't say, hey, I'm driving a Chevy. They said, I'm driving a Volt. It's enough of a difference, and it sells in different places. But, GM and Ford know their truck markets really well. I will be curious to see if GM follows Ford's leads in targeting the easiest part first, which is urban, suburban, and low-distance rural delivery vehicles that cover less than, say, 120 miles a day, which, if I remember, hits 80 or 85% of all delivery vehicles locally. Yeah. Because the use case for that, the money, it pencils out today. You will spend less money, especially with modern diesel emissions equipment and all the maintenance that uses, which I should probably ask you about on a sidebar, because I gather it's fairly substantial.
There is a lot of ongoing debate about diesels and how the EPA killed the diesel in 2007, and how just changing a sensor from these guys is a $2,000-$3,000 repair. Mm-hmm. I mean, because you're tracking down the stuff, and so that's where people get frustrated with EVs, is that a truck buyer is somebody who buys a truck once every 10 years, that's about the average. I mean, if you look at the numbers, it's actually 5, but most guys, that's from a fleet kind of skewing the numbers. Most guys I talk to, they're going to buy a brand new truck. They're probably my age, the first time buying a truck. They get maybe in their 50s buying a brand new truck, and they may buy 1 or 2 brand new trucks for life. I mean, and you get some younger kids, but usually that's a used market. They're buying that stuff. But these guys, and they grew up on diesels. They understand how to fix them, and they take a lot of pride in fixing them. They take a lot of pride in maintaining their own vehicle. And now you get from 2007, when the DEF fluid came out, and I think it's 2011 when DEF hit Ford, and all these changes, 2007, 2011, all these changes happened with the ERGs and checking the emissions. It reduced the performance of the diesel, reduced the fuel economy of diesel, and really made a lot of people bitter really bitter at what was going on. And so there's this collection of people that are really upset that now, since 2007, their diesels have gotten worse. They're more costly to repair. It's more expensive to do it. And they're like, they love the technology. They love the idea of a diesel. They love the towing power. They love the offline. They like the sound of it. I mean, to me, we've talked many times that owning a truck to me is a visceral experience. It's not just, climbing in it and seeing the image of it and liking what I'm in, but I can hear it turn over. I can hear my throttle on. I can hear it idle. I can, kind of stuff. I remember being at an event with, I forget who I was with, and I said, yeah, I mean, most guys around me, they just idle their diesels, which we had a funny joke offline on that. But they just sit there and idle their diesels because the rule was you never turn them off. Like, you always just ran them. It was better for the diesel to let it idle than it was turn it on, turn it off. And you
sounds
take that
to me like a design flaw.
It just that's the way the older diesels were, and so this whole mindset is still kept going, right? And so now you have this customer that's used to just idling the diesel. The thing's going to last 1,000,000 miles because that's always been the game of diesels. Long lasting, it's gonna run forever. And you take that and you throw them in a new truck, like I'm gonna pick on Ford here for a minute, but F-150 EcoBoost. I'm buying a Ford, so don't give me this. I'm not a fanboy stuff. But you get this new EcoBoost that has a turbocharged engine that's got turbos, a small displacement. It's got auto start stop. It turns off at stop signs. And you can't even repair it because most of the stuff these days is all through a computer with an OBD2 sensor you hook in to see what's wrong with your truck. And there's a lot of guys
in life, dude. Have you tried to repair a washing machine or a refrigerator lately?
I just repaired my dishwasher, actually.
How old is the dishwasher?
But that's that customer. It's like, so this eternal battle. So when I talked with EVs, I like the idea of less maintenance, right? So, no oil changes. I have less parts. I mean, there's
basically tires, wiper blades, and cabin air filter.
Right. I mean, my only real concern with EVs on a truck side is sensors, because damn sensors are too expensive, and they always seem to fail. So I know there's going to be sensors somewhere. There's going to be something somewhere.
I think it's entirely possible that diesels stress sensors more. Different kind of sensors, obviously.
Right.
Mechanical rather than electric. I can't speak to sensors. No earthly idea. But I made some notes of stuff you brought up, so I wanted to hit a couple. The commercial area for all of those, I mean, I think UPS trucks, right? Or postal service trucks, or, the bazillion little businesses out there that have a fleet of trucks to deliver stuff or pick stuff up. Those are all perfect for electric vehicles now. All the vehicles tend to go back to base at night. So you can charge them at a time where your electric utility is sort of, oh, you want more power at midnight? Awesome.
Right.
Yes, we'll help. And so the back to base 40 to 120 miles, sweet spot to get the first 10% of the vehicle fleet electrified. That stuff's easy. Now, the second set to me in the truck arena is all of those pickup trucks I see parked in driveways in places like suburban Atlanta and Westchester County, and maybe some of the nicer. There's some portion of people who use pickup trucks as commuter vehicles without using a lot of the capability that the pickup truck actually gives them to put large stuff in the bed, to tow or whatever. Or they may tow lighter things. For them, an electric pickup truck with a battery pack somewhere between 100 and 200 kilowatt hours. And I hadn't realized the Hummer EV, GM's just going all out on that thing. If it really has a 200 kilowatt hour battery pack, that is twice the largest Tesla pack. That's a whole lot of battery. And that's how they managed to get a promised range of, I think they said 300 miles off something that has the aerodynamics of a small municipal hospital. If you throw enough battery at something, you can do almost anything. But for larger packs like that, which are much cheaper now even than people figured they would be, a full-size pickup truck with, not the Hummer's capabilities, but, 250 or 300 miles of range will be fine. Towing is always going to be a problem because electric vehicles use most of the energy in the battery to turn the wheels, whereas the hit on energy that you take. I towed an old car in a diesel pickup from where I live to New Hampshire, and I think it went from 18 miles a gallon to about 13, towing, a not very heavy car on a U-Haul car trailer. That's going to basically cut your range in half on an EV because you're not wasting 70% of the energy in your tank anyway.
Which is a common refrain. And talking about towing, we
Yeah.
know that, as you've been saying, EV and towing is just not going to work right now. But guys, here's the thing, though. I think to get that point a little more is guys want it to work. We like the idea of towing a boat to a lake and not buying gas and driving home. That's fantastic. But what concerns us is it doesn't work. The reviews you see the Model X, people trying to long haul this stuff, it's like you have to be retired. You have to be taking your sweet ass time, stopping at the coffee shop for a couple hours, and as you go. And so what I wonder is, what point do we get to where a truck can still be a truck but EV powered? Is it a solid state battery situation? Is it a hydrogen situation? Is a hydrogen fuel cell in there? Where is that?
Hydrogen is its own separate hour of discussion. I'm just not going to go there.
Okay.
I'm largely a hydrogen skeptic for personal use vehicles, and it's highly debatable even for big trucks. But let's set that one aside, or make a date next year or something. But one of the things about EV charging is, because you can't pump diesel in your garage if you have a regular garage, people don't have this model for charging up at home overnight. 80% of all the miles on EVs are done overnight, but you're going to want to tow the boat to the lake. What a lot of people don't know is what EV infrastructure for road trips is about. And interestingly, Tesla is no longer at the head of the pack. They very much set the model for how you set it up. I think it's something like 96% of the lower 48 states, you can now drive a Tesla and be within range of a supercharger station. Any destination within those. There's like a couple parts of the northern plain states, but that's about it. And Tesla did all that in 7 years. They set up their own high-speed charging network. We have a whole bunch of companies setting up high-speed charging networks now. And the challenge there is you got multiple companies, you got multiple automakers, right? Ford and GM and Hyundai, Kia, and et cetera. And it all has to play together. Whereas Tesla is like Apple. You use Apple stuff or else.
Yep.
You don't want to use Apple stuff, go away. So a Tesla charging station only works with a Tesla. But that said, there's two answers. One is seamlessness, and one is fast charging. I don't know whether the Porsche Taycan registered at all on your radar when it came out. It's Porsche's new really fast electric sedan. It's like a Panamera if you chopped and channeled it. It's really low. Probably my favorite car I've ever driven, except for the old ones. I really didn't want to give it back. And it took about 90 seconds to figure out it had more power and more road holding than I had masculinity. And I'm good with that. But that car is the first one on the market that will charge at over 250 kilowatts. And what that means is, for a very large battery pack, you can charge to 80% in less than 20 minutes. Okay? That's a lot faster than Tesla. And so we are going to see the spread of those battery packs, which operate not at 400 volts, like all hybrids and all electric cars to date, but 800 volts. Okay? So we're going to have the Hummer EV will charge at 800 volts. Hyundai, Kia are going to bring out a bunch of 800 volt cars, and so on and so on. So there will be a lot of much faster fast charging out there, which means, let's say you take your Hummer EV and you want to tow something. Instead of a 300-mile range, you may have to stop every 150 miles, but that charge up may only take 20 or 25 minutes. And Teslas initially took about 45 minutes for full charge. Then they banged it down to 25, 30 minutes. My gut says no, it's never going to be the 6 minutes you take to pump diesel if the pump is up to speed and no one else is using the other pump, etc. But by the time, the nice thing about electric cars is you plug them in and walk away. I live in a state where you have to continue squeezing the handle. Do you guys have pump locks?
No, we don't have pump locks.
Okay, so you got to stand there, right, for 6 or 8 minutes. You just plug in the electric car, walk away. You go pee. You buy the sugary soda. You buy the salty snack food. Maybe some lottery tickets or cigarettes. You come back out and then you spend 6 minutes on your phone and you're done. Not quite as time efficient, but you get to use the time differently. And that will be rolled out within the next 2 to 4 years, which is when the trucks are just going to start coming anyway. So,
okay,
go ahead. You had a question?
No, I just think so the solution to towing is not going to be the faster charging battery. It's going to be the same.
Really big battery packs, like in the Hummer EV, and faster fast charge. Now, you'll still probably charge that truck at home every night, just like you would on 240 volts. But for those road trips, you will have faster fast charging, including charging stations set up that will take a car towing, which almost none of them are at this moment in time. And then, people understanding how that works. The car makers have been exceptionally bad at explaining how highway charging works and how it differs from home charging. Car salespeople are even worse. But the reason I brought up the Mach-E, I happen to be quite randomly and totally by accident the first civilian to use something called plug-in charge, which I didn't realize I was until this morning when they confirmed it. But what it is basically is, at the moment, there are all these different charging networks. Here's the metaphor. Suppose you got your truck and you can buy diesel along the way, but you have to have a phone app for every brand of diesel fuel. And they differ, and there's some brands that are only sold in certain states, and there's other brands that are only sold on highways. So you have to have a phone app for each one and a membership, okay? So you got to plan ahead and figure out what the diesel fuel is going to be, where you're going. That's what it is with EV networks today. So there's some ugly back-end integration that's starting to happen, and it's called plug-in charge. I took that Mach-E, I drove to a charging station that appeared in the network, and I just plugged in, and it figured out what the car was. It talked to Ford, and Ford said, here's the credit card associated with that car, and it said, okay, fine, and started charging. That's how Tesla has been working for 8 years, but that is how it will work in the future. You don't have to worry so much about which network it is.
Mm. Yeah,
and when it comes quick, sorry, the Taycan also does this as well.
No, I think that makes a lot of sense, because there's a lot of questions about proprietary only systems that Tesla's been using, and that was a poor decision, because we've seen that play out in the consumer electronics side for many years, and it never works out well. Whenever you try to build a system just for your own people, like Apple try to do, it just creates more problems.
Well, at the risk of pissing off Tesla owners among your audience, should any of them stumble in, but where else are they going to be able to sit around for 40 minutes and talk to other Tesla owners about how cool it is to be a Tesla owner?
I don't know. I want to get back to one other thing we were talking about, looking at the way trucks have changed these days. They've become the family vehicle, and for many reasons. I mean, I went to buy a truck or a minivan, was my choice for the kids, and I put my kids in the back of a Toyota Tundra with a Crew Max. My kids couldn't touch each other, and that was basically my entire buying decision. That they didn't hit each other in road trips, but also that I had more utility with the bed.
You live in America, don't you, son?
Yeah, right. But I mean, there's a lot of, I understand truck guys that there's a lot of criticism about shiny beds. I mean, I get that stuff too, but the reality from my aspect of it is we never talked about sedan owners not having 4 people in their sedan and their trunk full of stuff either. I mean, so to me, it's like you can't criticize a truck guy for not hauling something when you have your sedan doesn't haul anything either. I mean,
well, I would argue though that trucks are built to haul stuff, and it's only within the last 20 or 30 years that this sort of 80 or 100-year history of pickup trucks has morphed into them being family vehicles.
Sure.
It's why the whole light truck definition in DC, the way they classify trucks, is so bizarre because when they wrote it in 1970, no one in their right mind drove a pickup truck daily. That would be like driving a combine harvester daily.
Right. Yeah, I mean, and part of that, I mean, I don't think it's consumers' fault. Trucks have evolved so much. You've driven several trucks lately, and I know that there's certain ones that maybe aren't as good as other ones, but I think the standard crew cab pickup from a family standpoint, like my family with my kids, it's a much better vehicle for me and my needs than a sedan would be. I don't want to get into a sedan anymore. I'm not interested in bending down anymore. I'm interested in riding a little bit higher. I'm interested in having the opportunity to do something with that. I have the opportunity to put stuff in the bed. I have the opportunity to get it dirty, have the opportunity to do stuff versus say, and I know there's people that make sedans work. I don't want to criticize them. You've seen pictures on the internet. Somebody's like hauling a cord of wood in the back of a sedan. I mean, I get that people do this kind of stuff, but to me, it's an opportunity vehicle that you can do these things with a truck that you can't do a sedan. I don't think it's consumers' fault. It's just that, trucks, fuel economy's getting better. The mile per gallon penalties gotten less. And then now we're seeing right now with COVID, we're seeing a decrease in the number of people who are driving, and we're seeing a big increase in truck and SUVs because now it's becoming more of a lifestyle vehicle. We're seeing RV camper sales have exploded. You can't buy a camper. I mean, they are sold.
I think RVs and campers are a separate issue. My understanding of what happened in the auto market in 2020 was that this has been a very economically uneven hit from COVID. Most of the professional people I know, their lives haven't changed a lot, except they're working from home,
right,
instead of working in an office. I'll be very curious to see how many people sort of reassess and go, do I really want to spend an hour and 15 minutes in crappy traffic driving to face the same screens that I spent looking at for a year on my living room?
Right.
But,
post-COVID, it's going to be really interesting. Be very interesting what happens.
But the point is, it's the people at the bottom end of the economic chain who have been by far the worst hurt. Service workers, retail workers, all of those, they may not have been a big part of the new car market, but the people who are buying vehicles now are the ones who have the money and can afford it, which is why transaction prices soared so much.
Right. But do you think that post-COVID, though, I've seen a few stories in this as well, is that EV sales have kind of, I don't want to say they're down because historically they've always been in certain percentages of the market, but they're not growing as fast as maybe people expected because now you're not commuting as much. You think, I guess my bigger question is...
Well, we're in a trough of introductions. We haven't really had any new EVs of substance and in volume introduced in the last couple of years.
Okay.
We are going to have that starting in 2021. Ford should probably, I would expect them to sell 10 to 25,000 Mach-E's in the US next year. And when you add that up with Volkswagen and the Nissan Ariya, which is coming later in the year, and so on and so forth, in categories people want, which are compact crossovers, then all of a sudden you start to see some of those numbers rising. Part of it's just product cadence.
Right. So that's where you're thinking right now is that the reason EVs haven't sold as well is because we just need more new of them. New
and that's in the US. EVs have sold much better in Europe and in China. And I want to hit the China thing briefly because this is me being an industry geek, but part of the context for EVs is that the US is in grave danger of falling way behind globally in vehicles. Here's why. China has made it very clear for about a decade now that they intend to own the world's largest share of production of electric vehicles. Just as they did with photovoltaic solar cells, they set that out as a priority 20 years ago. Done, ticked off, achieved. And they're in the process of doing with lithium-ion battery cells. They don't have the nth degree of quality yet, but they do have the volume. And they're using their EV market to boost their domestic battery sales as well. China bought more EVs last year than all of the rest of the world combined. The US, Europe, and anywhere else that buys EVs, okay? China has already said, we will end the sales of new vehicles with tailpipes, but cleverly, they're not saying when. So all the automakers know it's coming, and China is one of those countries that may say, oh, by the way, it's 4 years from now, which when you're making billion-dollar production line thing is a problem. Europe has moved some of its dates forward, but the bulk of the industry outside the US really sees that combustion engines are going to wind down. It will be a transition that takes decades. The thing about full-size pickup trucks is that they are largely irrelevant to the rest of the world. And so in that sense, they're a cash cow for our domestic industry. They have retreated to their strength, which is selling highly profitable full-size pickups and SUVs. But I'm pretty convinced now, GM really understands that electric is the future. I was relatively impressed with the Mach-E. It is a more serious contender. It is somewhat better than I thought, albeit inefficient compared to any Tesla. And Fiat Chrysler basically has way, way bigger problems than electric cars. So, yeah, whatever. But
I want to go back to this China point, because I keep seeing this brought up in the comments. I keep seeing that you bring it up too. What is the fear around China? Why are we so afraid of China being number one in this one category? So, I mean, as you said, like, we're number one in pickup trucks, and they're number one in EV. So what's the fear here?
Because if the technologies that you use for those pickup trucks are only saleable in North America, then it's unclear that that justifies enough revenue to keep you as a profitable auto company. Okay, remember, so GM sells more cars in China than it does in the US, and has for a while. More Cadillacs are sold in China. 5 times as many Buicks are sold in China.
I've asked Buick about that too, and Buick's just like, we think we have an idea. I think it's an aspirational purchase from the old 50s and 60s films, but they're kind of a loss.
Well, the Buick marketing people need to be gently slapped then. The last emperor of China was known to own a Buick, and that brand value stayed throughout the entire period where no Chinese people could actually own cars. Yeah. That was what launched Buick. Now, the brand has probably changed since it's been on sale there 25 years, but Buick was a hugely revered brand because of its association with pre-communist China. Anyway,
all right.
Let's talk about side issues.
Yeah, I got one more question before we wrap this up.
Yep.
It feels like to a lot of consumers, a lot in truck world, I mean, as it is described, truck world guys tend to own a truck for 5, 7, 10 years, and they get back into it. It feels like if you bought a truck in 2010, and you came back in the market looking for a new truck these days, it's like all of a sudden the world has changed dramatically. It's just crazy how fast things have changed. And now it feels like the next couple of years we're gonna have all these electric pickups out there. Why does it feel like, I guess maybe not to us, but it feels like there's a huge rush to get these battery EVs in the market? Is that because of China? Is that because of pollution goals? Is that the answer? And where is the?
If we do not take 80% of the carbon dioxide emissions out of our life in the next 20 or 25 years, then pretty much, half the coastal cities in North America, which generate far, far, far more wealth than their land area indicates, will be underwater. We will be dealing with the kinds of firestorms, hurricanes, and whatnot that make whatever we've gone through in the last 2 or 3 years look like child's play. Now, you, and especially your kids, will be around to cope with that. I may or may not be. I come from long life, stubborn peasants, but I also, can read the demographic tables. This is all about climate change. But the last point I want to make is selling vehicles on climate change is an absolute loser proposition from day one. Or as a friend of mine said, the polar bears. There was a Nissan ad about polar bears. The nice thing is now, and we see it with the Hummer EV, we see it with the Mustang Mach-E, and we've seen it with every Tesla. Electric cars are becoming desirable because of the cars or trucks they are, not because they're electric. Teslas were cool, desirable, tech-advanced cars that happen to be electric. The Mach-E, especially in its GT format, is going to be a performance car that's faster than any gasoline, Mustang GT that you can buy. The Hummer EV will do things that the old Hummers could only dream of doing. Those are vehicles that are cool because of what they do. And when you get things like compact crossover EVs, I'm not going to make assumptions about you, but there's a whole lot of other parents out there who are going to realize they really like winning stoplight Grand Prix. They like out accelerating the next guy over. And other than that, it's smooth, it's quiet, it's easier to drive with one pedal driving. You never have to go to a gas station, and you get more space inside the same footprint because there's less mechanical stuff. Those are all great sort of functional things. Once you start to add some sex appeal or sizzle or badass, depending on your segment, all of a sudden people are going to think, no, EVs are not some weird nerdy little thing driven by that lady who recycles a lot. They're not some Tesla thing driven by the annoying tech bro. Right. They're actually something we could do. And I think the first electric trucks are going to bring that home. It's early days yet. This is a transition that will take for the rest of my lifetime. But the first 10 years were about proving that the technology worked and could be made more practical. The second 10 years are going to be about showing that the technology makes better vehicles in pretty much every segment.
Yeah, I'm excited for that. I mean, I can be critical I want, but my criticism has been it's weird. I drove a Nissan Leaf and it was strange. It was odd. The shifter was odd. And I was like, why does it have to be so weird? Why can't I just take a VW Golf? They were doing a diesel version, a gas version. They were going to do a hydrogen version, whatever. And I said, why can't just the same car, just different powertrain? Why does it have to be so bizarrely different? And it hasn't come out yet. And I'm still waiting. I mean, I tell people all the time, I want to buy an electric vehicle. Electric truck for me would probably suit 90% of my driving. Mm-hmm. But there isn't one yet that makes sense. And so I'm excited for the future to see what makes sense. Because at the end of the day, I mean, we all want clean air. And I understand the appeal of driving electric vehicles. I've driven them at different events and things. And
well, for truck world, one word, torque.
Yeah, torque's great. I mean, torque's a lot of fun.
Maximum torque at 0 RPM. That Ford F-150 ad where they towed an entire freight train full of F-150s.
Yeah.
That's a little bit of a physics cheat, frankly. But maximum torque is something that I would assume a lot of truck buyers will really appreciate, and easily modulated maximum torque.
Yeah, well, we're going to appreciate it when we buy the truck, drive it home, but after a few weeks, we're not going to like it because we have all the crap in the bed and all the crap's going to go. So
beyond my pay grade, sir.
You love going to 0 to 60 when the bed's empty, but I've done offline stuff, and all of a sudden you forget about the jack you had back there, the tire you had back there, and all of a sudden your tailgate looks like it went through the Iraq War.
Hang out your damn truck, son.
Yeah, right. It's up back there. So hey, thanks for joining me. Thanks for taking your time.
Thank you. No, this is fun. I learn a lot talking to you, so I really appreciate it. And hopefully there's a couple of myths or bits of knowledge that the myths got demolished, the bits of knowledge and the context. This is early days yet, but I'm excited to see what people who've been making trucks as a core business for 100 years do with electric trucks, because I think they're going to be kind of amazing.